Dr. Mercola, and there are a number of people who have criticized me over the years for my discussion of politics on this site because it's primarily, of course, a health site. However, it's important to realize that government, by definition, is the exercise of authority and control. And no one can argue that there is a powerful connection between government regulations which restrict your choices as well as limiting your freedom. And the current U.S. healthcare bill is a perfect example because it was massively influenced by the multinational drug corporations who negotiated behind closed doors with lawmakers to specifically ensure their self-serving approach that to mandate a healthcare plan is the only qualified healthcare plan. Natural therapies were not even an option. And the largest political lobby in the United States today are the drug companies. And they have been over the last century, and they've carefully manipulated the system and the legislation and created barriers that essentially help retain their control, increase their profits, and prevent people from learning more about natural, inexpensive options. So that is my justification for approaching policies, because I think it's really an essential component if you're going to improve the health of the culture. And in my view, one of the most courageous leaders and supporters of freedom is Congressman Ron Paul, who has correctly predicted decades ago many of the disasters that our country and our economy is currently going through. And at the time he made these predictions, he was severely ridiculed, but now he's recognized as being incorrect on nearly every one of these. Congressman Ron Paul, of course, is also a physician. And these are some of the primary reasons why I'm just absolutely delighted today to have the opportunity to interview him and discuss some of these issues.
We're honored to have you on the phone today.
Thank you.
A congressman from Texas, and the primary focus of this interview is going to be to put the health care bill into a proper orientation based on a constitutional perspective. Now, you've written a New York Times best-selling book called End the Fed, in which you say the Federal Reserve is the largest counterfeiter in the world, creating trillions of dollars out of thin air. And very few people, as you're familiar with, have a really good understanding of what $1 trillion really is. I'm wondering if you have any useful analogies to help our listeners understand what this means to them personally.
Well, there are a lot, and people have good descriptions of that to emphasize it. It's a huge sum of money, and it would take wheelbarrow loads to haul that stuff around, but it's just unbelievable. But the whole point, though, is the zeros on top of the money means nothing. You can just add zeros. And when I was a kid, there were very few millionaires. Now there are many, many hundreds of people who are millionaires, and there are quite a few billionaires. Soon you will have trillionaires. It's just a depreciation of money. And, of course, my attack on the whole system is because I don't think they should be doing this to our money and promoting big government in the meantime.
All right, and another component is that over years ago, Arthur Schopenhauer pointed out that each newly discovered truth passes through three stages. First, it's ridiculed, then it's violently opposed, and finally it's accepted as self-evident. Now, you've been a real light in the Congress, and for decades you've been exposing these inconsistencies, these paths that we've been going down. And I'm wondering if you've seen any progress and progression to the acceptance of self-evidence of some of the truths you've been highlighting.
Yeah, I certainly do. I think there's a big difference. I think a lot has happened in the last 2 years. I first ran for Congress in 1974, and the main motivation was to talk about economic policy and personal liberty. And back then, there were very few who had the biggest idea what I was talking about. And even recently, that was the case. I think 2 years ago, when we got a little more attention in the campaign, and then when the financial crisis hit, all of a sudden there was a lot of interest. That doesn't mean that I created the interest as much as I think the many seeds that have been planted over the several decades have just alerted people that there's another answer. And when the problem cropped up, all of a sudden we who believe in a free market and Austrian economics have gotten a lot more attention. And I think there's a lot of truth to that saying that, if you persevere with the truth on your side, eventually you can win out on some of these issues. We certainly haven't won on our issues, but we're certainly getting a lot more attention.
Is your perception that we're reaching a plateau, or do you see a continuing progressive increase in interest and support behind the ideas you're promoting?
Oh, I think it's rapidly growing, and I go to the college campuses frequently and always get large crowds out, and the young people are really very receptive to these views, and I think that's very important. I don't think true revolutions occur if you don't have the next generation ready to accept those ideas. And it doesn't mean that only young people do it, but if you get the support of the young people, it means they know there's something wrong with the system. They have to think about the change in the system, and the reception there is very, very good.
That's terrific, and thank you for your support of that process and really speaking to the college generation really make a difference. Now, as we're speaking, this is the day after the U.S. Senate confirmed Ben Bernanke for another 4-year term as the chairman of the Federal Reserve. You've been critical of Mr. Bernanke in the past, along with Alan Greenspan, whose policy seems to be continuing. Do you believe that any other politicians are beginning to listen to the recommendations you had for the economy that you've been giving for decades?
Oh, I think they're listening, but it's an overwhelming transition that would have to go through, so that's why they're very hesitant. Now, Bernanke was reconfirmed with a 70-30 vote, which sounds overwhelming, but it was really the worst vote any Federal Reserve chairman got for appointment. And I think one of the reasons why, even though there's a lot of people upset, why that vote is difficult to get and really change it is Bernanke is part of the issue, but he's not the whole issue, because Bernanke just represents a whole system of money. He represents a system of fiat money, unbacked money. The Fed create money out of thin air behind the closed doors. And to challenge that isn't to reject Bernanke. If Bernanke's election would have gone down or renomination had gone down, this would have been a vote of total lack of confidence in the monetary system. It would be very, very overwhelming. But 30% of the Congress and probably much higher percent of the American people are already much aware of there's something being seriously wrong with our monetary system. So this was a very significant event, but I think it's a lot more important than just Bernanke. I think what we're talking about here is more and more people are being informed about the nature of our system.
So is your suspicion that if we had waited a few years, or that his confirmation was only a year or two, that it would be more likely that he wouldn't have been reconfirmed?
Yes, and I think the changes will come. I think the change in the system will come even before you have the change of the chairman. Just changing the chairman wouldn't help much. Mm-hmm. But if we get to the point where we have a dollar crisis, which I anticipate we will, and we have to decide to take this power away from the Fed or limit the power of the Fed, then you get a different type of chairman in that will reflect these views, or you get rid of the Federal Reserve. But I think the philosophic changes have to come first with the support for changing the whole system, and then the chairman will be secondary to that. And we're in a transition now, and every day I think more and more people are realizing that the system has to be changed. And then Bernanke actually, or whoever it is that replaces him, that will be secondary to the changes that we have in the system.
So it seems from most of us who study this that the dollar crisis that you referred to is inevitable. And from your perspective, do you have any best estimates as to when that's going to occur? Is it be this year, next year, 10 years from now?
No, there's no way of knowing that, although all the Austrian economists predicted that there would be the collapse of the financial bubble, that there was a housing bubble, and they anticipated it. And some of them see it being formed for 10, 15, even 20 years. But nobody even pretended that they could say, well, on such and such date, the confidence would be lost, and then there would be this collapse of the system. And that's the same way with the dollar. If we keep printing the dollars and running up these debts and, increasing our financial obligations to the tune of trillions of dollars, it won't last. The dollar will fail. So you don't know the date.